And welcome back to FoxNews.com Live. We appreciate you joining us today. The big topic on everyone's mind, Egypt, the unrest in Egypt, what's going on, who will the next ruler be, and what's going to happen next. Joining me now, a couple of folks. David Mercer, who is standing by in Washington, D.C. He's a Democratic strategist. Thanks for joining us, David.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Also here on the set with me is Billy Hallowell, who's a journalist and commentator, BillyHallowell.com, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's begin with, what's going to happen next. And David, I would toss this to you first because we ended with KT and she was talking about the youth movement. So the question is really who is in charge of this youth movement? So who would be the leader of this opposition group, David?
It's not sure who will emerge as leadership in the overall protest, whether it is youth movement or otherwise. As we know, it's a middle-class protest fighting for access to their government and for reforms and democratic principles guiding them to that. And so we still have to see who is yet to emerge. Of course, we know there was a disappointment that we share with the Egyptian people in the statement by President Mubarak yesterday, delaying what had been hoped to be his transition out and leading to his Vice President Suleiman, among others, including representatives of the military and those that are protesting in the square. So it's still yet to emerge, but as we all know, we're monitoring this day to day in hopes of seeing the manifestation of the will of the people.
And Billy, what do you see as the danger as we approach, today, as the day moves forward? I know people were calling today, they said that it could be a huge bloodbath, but it looks now, at least at this point, watching the pictures in Tahrir Square, that it remains a peaceful protest.
I would hope and pray that it remains a peaceful protest through all of this. I think the thing that we're all thinking about and talking about publicly and privately is what's next. As you were saying, who is this leader? Reality is it'll probably be a number of leaders vying for that top spot. And so I think for the United States and the international community, we need to be aware and clearly monitoring it daily to make sure that we're a part of that process, to ensure that when this transition does happen, that it's a democratic one and that the parties who come in are going to be viable, good parties for the people.
But it's really apparent that our government, our top intelligence leaders, don't know what's going on either.
Clueless. Yeah, we're absolutely clueless. And I think the United States handled this well in the beginning, in my opinion. I was a big defender of how Obama handled it in being cautious and pensive at first. But now we're at a point where we need to make a decision and be definitive. I think we look very weak and, again, like we don't know what's going on at all.
David, you agree?
I don't agree with that, and I think your audience should know a couple of facts. You had Tom Donilon, the National Security Advisor, with Secretary Clinton and Gates meeting with Defense Minister of Israel, Barak. You had Kerry, the Foreign Relations Chairman, or ranking member of the, Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, on the phone with Suleiman, among others, in Egypt. And look, we are not going to be able to lay out the destiny of the Egyptian people, and there are going to be speculations, but it will be, at least I'm taking my cues from the people of Egypt and the way they've handled themselves in the square, also cues from the military where we do have leverage in that we have been supporting through funding and foreign appropriations the military, who have been very, very restrained in allowing the organic course and process to take its due course in setting the agenda for democracy.
But David, really wasn't speculation yesterday. Would you call some of the statements that were made yesterday speculation on the part of...
I wouldn't call it, they were not declarative statements. They were statements with regard to, as was alluded to, Mubarak stepping down. It was not confirmed that he is stepping down.
Well, President Obama said that history would be made.
And he has been saying that from the beginning, and history is in the making, and we will see a new Egypt, and one that does not involve Mubarak, and at least my estimation, and I think the facts and the reports on the ground spell that out. So history is in the making. If President Obama had confirmation, and I don't think the president would preempt President Mubarak in finding his own way to acknowledging the will of the people, which is to step aside. He's got to let that evolve in Mubarak's mind himself, and to do so as expeditiously as possible.
See, I think we need to be clear in messaging, and I think that's what President Obama hasn't done. He has not been clear in how he is messaging this, and that was what I loved about President Bush. Whether you liked him or not, or you agreed or disagreed, he was very clear. President Obama sat on his hands on Iran. He's sitting on his hands a little bit here. We need clear leadership, and you mentioned taking cues from the Egyptian people. I think at this point we need to take the cue.
Well, let's take.
And what would you recommend in such? What would you recommend?
David, hold that thought. Billy, hold that thought, because right now you were talking about, you were taking your cues, David, from the people in Egypt. So let's go directly to Cairo, Egypt, and check in with Leland Biddert, who is standing by with the very latest going on. Hi, Leland.
Hi, Heather. You know, the crowds here are growing larger and even more defiant. Behind me, you have the Nile River. Across the river, we have the issue of the Ministry of Information, which is where state TV has their large operations. It's now been surrounded by there's a ring of army tanks that are preventing those demonstrators from inside, but this crowd is angry, they are defiant, they simply want President Mubarak out. The important thing we've been talking about over the past couple of weeks is which way is the army going to break? Are they going to go with Mubarak, or rather are they going to go ahead and side with the protesters? So far, at least, it looks like they're siding with Mubarak. The latest information we have is that there was a directive issued by the military in a statement on state TV where the heads of the military said essentially that President Mubarak's plan of transferring most of his power to the vice president and then waiting until September to step down was acceptable to them. The Army also said they thought that it was reasonable they would go ahead down the emergency laws that they had in effect for 30 years that everyone hates so much here in Egypt. The protesters, though, have said that's not acceptable. The only way they're going to leave the streets is, of course, if President Mubarak leaves office. Tahrir Square today, packed. It's impossible to really estimate these crowds. 100,000 people. The images were incredible to look at, something I've never seen before. The amount of power that this crowd has is incredible. It's also important to remember, Heather, though, that this crowd is completely peaceful.
And Leland, I believe that you are breaking up a little bit. We're looking at live pictures right now of Tahrir Square. You said well over 100,000 people. If you can hear me, my question would be to you, what do you think the role the military will serve if this crowd, in fact, decides to march on the palace? Is that a fear? Is that something that maybe people are talking about there?
Well, certainly people are talking about it, Heather. However, it appears as though the palace is surrounded once again by the military. I just talked to someone who came back from the palace. They said it's a very peaceful crowd. There haven't been any confrontations between the military and between the protesters. Of course, the fear is here that this turns violent. Does the military fire on the crowd? Does the crowd start attacking the military? So far, that hasn't happened. Remember, the military in Egypt is incredibly well respected, not only by the people, but also by the foreign community at large. So the thought of violence erupting between the crowd and the military is something that would probably be a worst-case scenario and one that has yet to happen.
Okay, let's certainly hope that that remains the same. Thank you so much, Leland. We appreciate it. It would be amazing to be over there right now, definitely.
Absolutely,
And
covering it.
So, okay, David, Billy, you were about to get into fisticuffs over our last...
Not at all.
No fisticuffs here. You're in D.C. That's why we put you in D.C. today.
We can't be in studio together, right?
So you.
No, I was asking Billy with regard to the will of people, what he might recommend or what he sees that isn't being done from our standpoint, with the qualifier that it's not for us to do, as we see it. it's the demonstration of the will of the people in Egypt. But that was a question I had asked Billy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It has to come from the Egyptian people, but I think that we can support that more vocally and be consistent with that. I mean, a few weeks ago we were saying that this was a stable regime. This is not a stable regime. This is not a stable country. And I think we need to be definitive. We don't need Obama getting out there and being a professor, and he has very eloquent words to offer the Egyptian people and the Americans in addressing this, but we need him to be solid and to address the Egyptian people and support them.
And we do have a question before we move on to our next topic, just to let people know that are watching or at home today, that are online. Our FoxNews.com poll actually has to do with this today, and it's how confident are you that Egypt can transition to a democratic state? So, you know, on your computer screen there, you can vote very, somewhat, or not at all that you in fact think Egypt can transition to a democratic state. Let us know what you think, and we'll kind of keep you updated as to what people are saying. And David, so your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are with the power that they've illustrated on one hand and letting it be self-evident what their will is without the use of violence, I place a great deal of hope in their aspirations and seeing to a democratic Egypt and no doubt a different one than we've been accustomed to. If I might make remarks to Billy's statement about a stable Egypt, in the context of the regional affairs, Middle East peace, Israel, the other Arab states, it was, in that context, it was a stable regime. Now, we are seeing that a stable regime that represses its people at some point is going to have to reckon with it, and the expression of this administration, as well as those in the region from Turkey and elsewhere, is that the will of the people will overcome that repression. And if it is not acknowledged, it will become instability, and right now the face of instability is President Mubarak. He's the one in the way of the progress.
But David, my question would be then, how do you determine if the will of the people is the next phase and the next step, and we don't have other forces coming in and taking over during this volatile time? I mean, how do can we assist in that way at all?
Sure, and I think we have we have not seen inciting of violence by what others have raised as a specter of fear in the Muslim Brotherhood. We haven't seen a military that is taking its orders from Mubarak to march on the people. There's a lot of evidence that all of us, including the audience, need to take note of, that this is so pure a movement by the middle class, not fighting because of his policies towards Israel or any anti-Americanism. This is about their independence, about their freedom, about their future, and taking control of it. So I think there are a lot of cues out there for us to take note of and to gain inspiration from.
And Billy, I know that this is really where your background comes into play in terms of the youth movement, a youth movement, be it either here in America, be it there in Egypt, and they really have used the internet, Facebook. Those are their, if you want to say, weapons of choice. Absolutely. And how they've gotten their word out and they've spread this. Where do you see it going from here with those sources?
Absolutely. I'm a huge youth advocate, as you know, and I really think it's great that the youth have risen up and they're using these Western tools, actually, to interact and to dialogue and to share their stories. I do think we need to be there for them, the international community, the United States, to help guide them towards the right way. But I think they're on their way towards doing that. I'm highly supportive of it. I think this is great. But we're still in the infancy of this, so we don't know what's coming next. And so it would be very smart for us to guide them and be along in that process, which is why I believe that the president does need to be more definitive and to gain the trust of the youth and of the general population in Egypt, so that doing that will be a little bit easier when the time comes.
And I would remind, it is amazing in Billy's remarks, and I agree with them, the tools that have been, through innovation or whatever, been ours, that we have passed on globally, and the use that they're being put to. And I also remark that, listen, uncertainty never got in the way way of democracy before, and we, the American people, are pure examples of the challenges, the fears that we had to overcome to see our democracy to fruition. And you see that acting out in the 21st century with the tools that Billy has alluded to, be it Facebook or Twitter and other technology.
David, I have to go back to a statement that you made just a moment ago. In reference to the Muslim Brotherhood, you said a spectrum of fear related to them. Or fear or secrecy. Do you believe maybe what was said yesterday? I believe that it's a secular group. What are your thoughts on the Muslim Brotherhood?
I think that, we are seeing an evolution in the identity and the characteristics of the Muslim Brotherhood, at least with specifically addressing Egypt. And if there's a poll that you and your audience might follow up later on from the Washington Institute, the first ever taken over the last couple of days, where 16% of the population, a marginal segment of the population, supports the Muslim Brotherhood for one, and secondly, projecting that if there were elections, that they would garner maybe 1% of the vote. So my point here is that they are not as significant as some have tried to raise the specter of them being. And really what the storyline is here is the hundreds of thousands of people that we've been addressing in the pictures that we see on the screen.
So you believe
and the movement and what they stand for.
So you believe that they're a secular group?
I cannot, again, I won't speculate that they are now wholeheartedly a secular group. They don't come from those roots, although they may be evolving, and it may be through the leadership that we see in the will of the people, that they, within Egypt, know that the only way they could participate is through nonviolent protest in seeking democratic reforms. And that is where our focus should be. It is not the reverse. It is not the Muslim Brotherhood in some country taking over through armed combat the palace of a president that they want to overthrow.
Some people may disagree with those
statements.
Well, you don't. Well, the facts say otherwise.
Well,
because that's not what we see on the streets.
The facts are just, what was it? This is day 18. Was it last weekend when people were being trampled on in the middle of Tahrir Square and killed in Tahrir Square, and the violence was running rampant, and a lot of people were claiming that those were, it had a lot to do with the Muslim Brotherhood. It had a lot to do with Mubarak.
And a lot were claiming that it had to do with pro-Mubarak protesters.
Well, either way, though, there hasn't been enough.
But the overall story is what we see in the visual right now. If you turn to the screen, we have a peaceful demonstration on balance going on in Egypt.
And the word that was being chanted more than any other, and I found this interesting, I saw this yesterday, was peaceful. And that was the word that was being chanted more than anything else there in Tahrir Square. So we should say that.
And that's where our hopes should lie and what we should take stock in.
We don't know what the future for the Muslim Brotherhood holds, though, and we do know that maybe the will of the people is a peaceful transition. Nobody knows what will happen after that peaceful transition. They may be adapting to it. They may be a part of that, but they're not a secular group. And what comes next with them, we'll have to wait and see.
Hey, David, we have to say goodbye to you, but thank you so much.
It was a pleasure being with you. Have a good weekend.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.